There's any motions to grant a leave of absence? There's no non-attendance. We have 3 speakers tonight, and the first speaker is Mr. Graham Brookman. Could you please approach the microphone, please? I think you know the drill, Graham, about 5 minutes.
Yes.
Thanks very much for the invitation to be with you tonight. My name's Graham Brookman. My wife Anna Marie and I have a farm near Gawler growing various field crops, sheep, vines and orchards. Am I getting a bit of noise? You can hear me?
Yep, now
good. We also make wine and process nuts. I'd like to congratulate the Council for the serious and thorough way in which it's approached this issue, which may determine the way in which our landscape is managed, the way Gawler grows and adds value to its food and wine, how we interact with neighbouring councils, and how prosperous our future will be. This decision's not time limited like a moratorium, it's notionally forever. As advised by the Local Government Association, council should not limit its consideration of this issue to marketing matters. It's fitting that issues like environmental impact, human health, or likely effect on council itself may be considered in deciding whether to apply for non-genetically modified area designation or not. However, the Minister advises that his considerations will relate to risks to marketing and trade. Worldwide polls generally, and a recent Nielsen report, and in particular a CSIRO poll, showed only 7% of shoppers were unconcerned about eating GM food. The rest were. So supermarkets in Australia and New Zealand have policies not to stock food labelled GM. Looking internationally, in the Western world and most of Asia, supermarkets do not stock GM products, and many will not stock meat from animals fed on genetically modified feed. Even McDonald's in New Zealand and parts of Europe ban GM ingredients. In fact, the USA is Australia's largest customer for certified organic products as a result of their government's refusal to label GM food. The study by the University of Adelaide Centre for Global Food and Resources showed a market compound annual growth rate of greater than 16% for non-GM food globally. This rapid growth is also predicted by market research companies Nielsen and Technavio. The Global Megatrends report by CSIRO and Riordan showed massive growth potential to service developing markets for food embodying health, provenance, sustainability and ethics for the rapidly growing world middle class. To adopt the growing of GM crops when the world food market is heading strongly towards non-GM would certainly risk our trade and marketing, both in crops and other areas of trade and marketing that are important in our council area. The Minister's second key point is that he would need to see that stakeholders in the area are currently receiving a marketing or trade advantage as a result of it being non-GM. As you know, South Australia has historically been a non-GM crop area, so we need to look at our market and trade advantages over the states that adopted GM some years ago. Data presented in the 2020 Department of Primary Industries Gross Margins and Enterprise Planning Guide, virtually a farmer's Bible in terms of planning crops for the next season, shows clearly that GM canola is significantly less profitable in terms of gross margins over 5 years of data than non-GM cultivars right across South Australia, from the dry to the well-watered parts of our state, if there are any well-watered parts of our state. A study in Western Victoria also found GM varieties had no yield advantage, and canola is the only significant GM crop grown in Southern Australia. Daily prices on the grain markets show certified non-GM canola is commanding a premium of 12 to 19% over GM canola. GM canola on the 24th of July, just a week or so ago, exported from Western Australia, was worth $519 a tonne. Non-GM canola was worth $619 per tonne. Yesterday there was an $85 per tonne penalty on GM grain in Western Australia and over $60 per tonne at Roseworthy. GM also costs more to grow because of its high seed costs and the payments for GM technology and stewardship fees and other royalties per tonne.
Graham, 30 seconds, my friend. You have 30 seconds more.
I haven't had for 5 minutes.
Yeah, that'd be 5 minutes. You've got 30 seconds more. Keep going.
Come on, it's not 5 minutes. So I guess all in all, we can say that we know that the canola is not making more, it's making less. We know...
Okay, that's time, please, Graham.
Okay, fair enough.
Have you got any questions, please? Councillor Tooley was first.
Graham, thank you for speaking. You speak very passionately on this. My question is, and you've given us a lot of data on canola, town of Gawler, how much canola or cereal crops do you believe were growing in the town of Gawler?
Very few, but certainly there are cereal crops grown in the town of Gawler. All of the blocks along Hillier Road where I live pretty much grow wheat, barley, oats, etc. But I mean, this doesn't relate just to canola. This is a change in legislation that would allow any number of genetically modified crops to grow. It's just that the only genetically modified crop that has actually become commercialised in South Australia is GM canola. And so what we were asked by the minister to do was to address the actual advantages that could be shown. And I have just shown you that every farmer that grows canola is going to lose money on it in terms of the actual crop yield. Now, farmers might have some other reason for growing canola, but in terms of the profitability, it's not there. The open pollinated or at least non-GM varieties have a market advantage. Do you accept that?
Look, I hear what you're saying. I've read other reports that put another case, but the reason I asked that question specifically is that my understanding is that if we're going to have any opportunity to win this status with the government, it's about saying that we have an argument that says we have a particular organic stance or a particular reason that should zone Gawler and say, for these reasons, we should be able to be GM free. And so what we need is information that definitely helps us in that, if that's the path that we want to go. Not just...
I can tell you what happens on our farm, and you mentioned the word organic, which I hadn't used, but we are an organic farm. We are at Gawler. We are the largest growers of certified organic pistachios in Australia. We grow grapes. We grow about 150 varieties of crop. We make wine. We process nuts. And clearly, we make more. I mean, being certified organic, the actual premium is a lot more than for NGO, but nevertheless, it's all there. It's all happening on our property. And if I'd been able to continue telling you this story, it would have all come out.
I've sort of helped you by asking a couple of questions.
Yeah, you did.
You have any other questions, Councillor Tooley?
No.
And next one was the Mayor. You first.
Thank you, Graham. You mentioned about penalties. Is that to do with exports in regard to GM crops?
Most canola in Australia is exported, yes.
And you mentioned about penalties. What's the nature of that penalty or penalties that GM crops have applied to them?
If we look at Western Australia, which actually went GM not so long ago, they've had to replicate all of their receival facilities so that they can segregate GM from non-GM. And so it's quite a business, and they do have a lot of trouble keeping them separate, and thousands of tonnes of grain do actually get contaminated through the transport and various other systems that the grain must go through. And inevitably, if there's a mistake, all that grain will end up in the GM bin so that there is no GM ending up in our export markets, particularly in Europe, where most of our canola is going at this stage.
And just subsequent, just on your particular business, your certified organic, with GM crops around you, or potentially other GM crops or items that might come in the future, how will that impact your business as a certified organic grower?
Well, if we look at what happened to a guy called Marsh in Western Australia, he had a neighbour called Baxter who had a crop of canola which was swathed, and unfortunately over a period of weeks while this crop was maturing on the ground, it was blown onto Marsh's place, and he did let the certifying body, NASA, know that potentially his non-GM crop was probably contaminated with seed from this other ripe canola. And so that went to court to see if he could get some sort of remedy to the fact that most of his farm had been decertified since it was contaminated. And it went much further, and it ended up costing him his farm, essentially, in fighting the case to get any sort of kind of acknowledgement and repair of the damage that had been caused to him. So that was accepted, and a bit later in the Western Australian Parliament, there was an attempt to sort out some way that there could be a scheme to overcome this problem of conflict between GM and non-GM or organic farmers. And in organics, there's like a zero tolerance of GM genes in what you deliver. It's not quite so stringent with non-GM, up to 0.9%. But it was again defeated in the Parliament. And so at this stage, if I had, for instance, if the town of Gawler happened to have a GM crop growing next to me and it in some way contaminated my land, there would be nothing in our Parliament nor the Western Australian Parliament to look after me. And there are a whole lot of ways that that could be remedied, like buffer zones and so forth, but all of this was not considered.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Vallelonga, then Councillor Kolsch.
Couple of questions, Graham.
Yes.
I've done some investigations about the Yorke Peninsula. No council up there have put a rubber stamp on what you're talking about. So, and they're a big farming area. Gawler's really not really a farming place. We've got a few little rural spots, but we're not really a farming spot. So I think that we're really pushing something uphill, and I think that we're really going the wrong way about it. We don't really need to worry about the GM. Let the big farmers really worry about it, because us little farmers here aren't going to make no big difference to Australia.
Councillor Vallelonga, can you ask a question, please?
Okay.
Can you ask a question?
Do you know that the Yorke Peninsula is not worried about the GM?
Well, I know that Yorke Peninsula has decided not to proceed with any community consultation. If they had read the Local Government Association briefing on it, I think they would have gone about it in a different manner. But clearly they either didn't read it or they ignored it. So they didn't really go out to find out exactly what was going on. But I think that to a large extent, the whole effort here has been blocked by the farmers' general kind of feeling that they would like to have every tool at their disposal, every chemical tool at their disposal, and they will make up their mind in terms of profitability and the way they run their farm And so I think that was probably the foremost thing in their mind, rather than actually going back to the statistics in the PIRSA report and working out that they actually would be worse off with, I mean, if they could do both, most of them will choose to be non-GM. And maybe if they get a paddock that's got a bit dirty or something, then they'll perhaps grow some GM because they can nuke it with lots of chemicals and clean it up and then get back to a normal cropping. But if you look at all of the states that have GM available, it's only a percentage of them that actually use it. But in so doing, they actually compromise the status of everyone else in that we know that this segregation and so forth is too difficult and there's too much contamination. In America now, there's a lot of soupy genes floating around, and that's not something we want in Australia. So I don't know what Coopers think about buying GM barley. You know, I'm sure there'll be lots and lots of other crops that come out over time, and whether the drinkers will really appreciate that. But what I said in the first part of my address was that the world is travelling in a different direction. We are an exporting nation and we have to watch what our markets want in the future. This decision is not for the next 12 months. This is notionally forever. Thanks for the question, Jim.
Councillor Koch.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Graham, you talked about the gross returns being less for genetically modified crops, is that right?
Yeah, so...
Could you just explain why it would be less?
It will be less because people in other countries don't want GM grain, essentially. So you know, the stuff floats out on a boat and it goes to some market somewhere, and they know that, you know, most people would rather have non-GM canola, and there are lots of health reasons for that, and that's the reason that it's cheaper. So it's a less desirable product than non-GM canola.
Councillor Koch.
Are the input costs the same between a genetically modified
No,
crop?
it's far more expensive to grow.
Could you explain why?
Yes, so the GM canola growers need to pay much more for seed. They also have their technology and stewardship agreement that attracts a payment, and then they need to pay a royalty per tonne, and then they have to suck it up because they've actually yielded less as well. So it is essentially a less profitable kind of exercise, and they can't keep any of their own seed, of course. That must be sold off the place. So it's not like, you know, you can keep your seed for next year, which you would be able to do with a non-GM seed. Yeah.
Councillor.
Probably following on from that last question from Councillor Koch, I think there was a recent survey of South Australian farmers, and something like the majority said they were very unlikely to plant GM crops. Have you seen that survey?
I can't say I've seen or remembered the results, but looking around, you know, the Canadians, as soon as the GM came out, you know, just grabbed it, and just about everyone grew it, and gradually farmers have kind of worked it out, and so as far as they're concerned, you know, they'll follow the dollar ultimately, but there is this real will amongst some of the South Australian farmers to, you know, play with the new toy and see what they can do with it, and so on. So it's, I don't know what the exact percentages are, but certainly not all of the farmers are going to go out and grab GM. A lot of them really dislike the whole idea of it.
Councillor Toole, you got another question? Councillor Toole.
Graham, I've heard you talk tonight about and state quite clearly about the cost benefits, etc. Are you aware of the analysis done by the Grain Producers SA, where they had an independent economic analysis, and they state the analysis concluded that growers did not receive a marketing advantage as a result of South Australia being GM free, and that the only effects of the moratorium was to deny the use of safe and effective GM tools. Now, you're telling us that that's wrong. You're saying that your facts are right.
Well,
I mean, but this, see, the problem I've got, Graham, is do I just believe one person standing at the podium speaking to me, where I can't substantiate what they're saying, or do I look to reports like this and statements like this, which is contrary to what Councillor Hughes just said, which says that the SA growers are welcoming it? Now, I'm not saying my position, am I in favour or not, but I'm trying to make an informed decision, and I'm getting contrary information, and yet I've got to make a decision. So what I like is honest facts, and you know that's what sways me.
Right.
And these groups here are telling me they've done extensive surveys, and then I'm having Councillor Hughes and yourself make statements, but I'm not seeing I grant that you're enthusiastic. I get that.
Yeah, I have sent the submissions to council, which are all linked to market sites. So you simply have to hit a link to the price site for canola, which is run by Cargill, the biggest grain dealer in the world, and it will give you all of the terminals at which the grain is received and from which I guess it's either transported or exported, and there it is. And I quoted some of those prices to you, and that's what I got from Cargill yesterday and several weeks ago. And it was also noted in the PIRSA handbook, as it were, Bible for farmers in terms of gross margins, and it looked at canola prices over the last 5 years, yields over the last 5 years and prices, and that was their result. And I have also talked to a senior agronomist with PIRSA who said, well, the average farmer will probably only use a GM crop every now and then to clean up a dirty paddock. He would be losing money on it. So I have sent the information to the council. I would have hoped that it had been circulated. It's all linked to websites. Go for it, see if I'm right, see if I'm right. It's not very complicated. You've got the PIRSA handbook and you've got the Cargill price site. This is not rocket science. Exactly how much the farmers are required to pay to Monsanto and people like that for their technology agreements and so forth, I don't know. That's held close to the chest of various people, so I can't quote that, but it's extra money. And it's extra money that doesn't end up in our community here. The profit centre is in the US, whereas we have perfectly good plant breeders in Australia who have done us proud. They have actually had money lifted out of their budgets, and presumably some of that's ended up in these magnificent breeding sites that we have in each state. But our guys have been chugging along, breeding stuff, using hybridisation and conventional techniques, and they have produced crops that are better adapted to our environment and more profitable. And the rest is smoke and mirrors. And certainly the Mercado report and the Anderson review, were not greeted with the greatest of conviction by the academics and the industry. So up to you.
Okay, thanks, Graham.
Thank you.
You got 20 minutes in the end.
Okay, I'll call up Catherine Warhurst, please. And I'll give you, I forgot to tell Graham, I'll give you a 30-second warning again, Catherine.
I just want to point out that I'm not speaking as the chair of the Climate Emergency Action Plan Working Group. I'm here as a local business owner. I suppose you probably all know me. My name's Catherine Warhurst. As my elected representatives, I'd like you to make Gawler a GM-free council. It doesn't just affect farmers. I know, this is key to how the decision is being made, but I'm here to speak to the concerns from someone who is using our local produce and those who are eating my bread. I'm just starting up a micro bread bakery in Gawler. My tagline is natural, local sourdough. I also happen to have a degree in environmental science. I now want to use my bread business as a way to contribute to a more sustainable future. I want to make bread for my community that is as local and as natural as I can make it. I've spent a lot of time finding great local suppliers as close as possible. My research has shown me that there are a lot of people in this community that want that too. At times, it's actually surprisingly hard to source local produce. It's far easier for me to buy Maldon sea salt from Europe than it is to source salt from South Australia. Most flour available cannot be traced to its farm, so even though it's milled locally, it could have come long distances across Australia. I don't want all the work I've done sourcing local suppliers to be threatened with potential GM contamination, and that my research has shown that my customers will run a mile from. I want to support the producers who work hard to supply the kind of great produce that I want to bake my bread with. So this is not just about farmers growing some new type of crop. If it was, I'd be at home tonight making bread. But as an environmental scientist, I had to share my concerns. What this issue is about, it's about releasing GMOs into our community, into our lands, and into production and processing chains, and never being able to recall it. It's the genie we can never get back in the bottle. It's not about just saying yes to some of the farmers who want to grow GMOs. It's actually about saying to conventional and especially organic farmers, too bad, you'll have to bear the brunt of the costs of trying to prevent contamination, or too bad if you lose your certification or your markets because of contamination. Organic production methods are seeing sustained rates of growth and consistently higher prices. So why is it okay at the demands of Bayer or Monsanto or a proportion of farmers who want to use GM products to impose them on the rest of our community? Contamination is inevitable and it's costly. It's been shown around the world that GM contamination happens regularly. Even professional seed producers themselves have been unable to prevent contamination. The mechanisms to compensate affected producers, for example, loss of income due to contamination, lag far behind the introduction of GMOs. Now, if it is possible to do this, why don't we set up a fair compensation system first and then introduce the GMOs? A system that won't drag conventional or organic farmers through the courts, bankrupting them along the way. Now, the Food and Agriculture Organisation of the United Nations has an interesting couple of pages on the pros and cons of GMO. So and it's only about one page on each, so I recommend you read it. But out of interest, I went to Bayer's website to find out what they're saying about the benefits are of GMOs. They had three main arguments. One was using natural resources more efficiently. The other one was fighting pests and diseases. And the third was conserving natural habitats in meeting food production demands. Now, these are all great objectives. Nobody could argue with those. But the really great thing is that these are all achievable in other ways with none of the inherent risks of GMOs. If it's about using resources more efficiently, then approaches like regenerative agriculture not only reduces fossil fuel-based inputs like fuels and chemicals, it can also store carbon in healthier soils, actively drawing down emissions safely into the soil. If it's about pests and diseases, then any student of evolution and genetics will tell you that the safety and resilience is in the diversity of genes in a population. No single new product or plant variety will ever be a complete solution. Furthermore, it's impossible to really understand how these GM products will interact with all of the other unique plant, animal and insect species that are parts of our soils and landscapes. That research just never gets done. On the flip side, I'd also like to say that it's quite clear that GMOs won't fix these problems that Bayer have highlighted. If it's about solving world hunger, global food production could already feed 10 billion people. So food production is not the barrier. The barrier is affordability, unequal distribution, poverty, or unstable political systems. Now, I don't want to have to continue dealing with the potential for new GM food crops. I want to be able to easily purchase my ingredients and enjoy making the kind of natural, healthy bread my community has told me they want to buy. So I want you to protect my community from a technology that pushes risks onto those that haven't asked for it and don't want it.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Davies.
Yeah, so just in terms of the contaminations, etc., we've sort of heard from the financial perspective of we don't want contamination because we can put the seal of organic on it, etc. But just sort of from a more health-related standpoint, I'm just curious to what extent the you know, because I guess my concerns are, you know, there's a sort of side to environmentalism that's easy to agree with, and then there's sort of the side that starts going on about toxins and vaccines and, you know, putting sulfur on your face to cure cancer and that sort of thing, you know, because it's got, the chemicals have big names in them. You know, to what extent is this something that is a real sort of verified health risk, I guess, as opposed to being, you know, that sort of thing?
Well, I studied science, not conspiracy theories. So my degree is in environmental science. Which bit of the question would you really like me to respond to? Because there was quite a bit in there.
So, well, basically, it was just sort of an invitation to be able to talk about, you know, rather than from the financial point of view, what are the health risks associated?
Well, I would be very quick to acknowledge that my main concern is around a lot of the unknowns and the uncertainties, and the solutions that this technology are aiming to solve are actually solvable using other methods that don't pose the same problems about releasing novel and unexpected things that might happen with gene technology. Now, the FAO website lists a series of different things that could happen. I didn't want to get all technical and kind of describe them all, but there are risks associated with it, and contamination is just one of them. There's other issues around putting in allergenic genes, or, I mean, there's probably about, you know, 5 or 6 key aspects to it. But, you know, for me, I'm kind of going, well, what kind of problem are we trying to solve here? Is it feeding the world? Well, then we can feed the world in other ways that are more effective. Is it about other elements to it? Is it about creating crops that are more resistant to climate impacts? Well, actually, there's been some really interesting investigations into some of the more heritage varieties that, for instance, have solved potato blight problems from heritage strains and things like that. So there's actually quite a lot of information out there that solves the problems that we're seeking to solve without the drawbacks that this kind of technology has.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Shanks.
Firstly, I hope to see you in the 2022 elections there, Catherine. You spoke brilliantly, and yeah, we need more people like you. Just on your local supplier, and also defining the town of Gawler. You just touched on you get your suppliers locally. Are you able just to really clarify that for us?
Well, a lot of it's not Gawler, because it's interesting in that so much, even though we're virtually in a wheat belt, it's actually really hard to buy wheat from a farmer that is able to supply a small scale producer like me, or a small scale kind of manufacturer like me. So our systems aren't really geared to that small scale local distribution. So that's a real challenge. The closest farmer that I've found is actually in the mid-north. He's in Orroroo. Although there are other farmers that are experimenting with heritage grains that are at Langhorne Creek. And that is actually super local when we're talking about the way some of these crops are moved around Australia. For instance, even though we might have local millers, a lot of the grain that they're milling is not local. It's coming from all over Australia. So what we think might be local, and it's great to have a local mill, and it's great to have the jobs associated with a local mill, what's actually being milled isn't always local. It's actually coming from Western Australia, or it could be coming from, you know, New South Wales or even southern Queensland. So I suppose I just want to say that, you know, it's not just about the farmers, it's about the people who use what they produce, and it's also about the people who want to eat the food. I have a clear group of customers that they want to buy natural food, they want to buy local food, and I'm doing my very best to do that. And GM is just like 1950s kind of retro technology. It's not as it's not as smart as it sounds. Yeah, it's technical, but is it really solving the solutions that we need to be solving when it relies on more fossil fuel inputs, when it misses some of the opportunities to solve multiple problems at once? So if we're looking at different regenerative agriculture models, when we're looking at getting more carbon back down into the soil as well. So there's cleverer ways of doing it. And I just see this as kind of the old-fashioned techno-fix approach to our problems, in that we want this kind of magic bullet. That magic bullet doesn't exist, and it'll increasingly fail to exist when we're dealing with these very complex and wicked environmental problems that are really quite hard to manage. We need to be seeking to get as many advantages as possible out of everything that we do. That's why I've moved to starting my own business and producing food. I'm very passionate that our economy should be based around the way of the future, and that's increasingly local, and hopefully it's increasingly organic, and more of our money stays in our local economy and less of our money goes to, international shareholders of major corporations.
Councillor Tooley.
Catherine, we're talking here obviously about GM, but can we separate the discussion on GM from chemicals? Now, to qualify that question, I do source my flour from just up there at Tarlee. And yes, they get some local and some they don't get local, but it's stone ground and it's the best I can get at the moment. But they tell me, the Dunn family, that they have had times where it wasn't the GM drift that worried them, it was the chemical drift. And if you get chemical drift from farmers, and farmers, whether they're non-GM product, they use chemicals, and whether it's aerial or whether it's tractor driven, the chemical contamination can completely blow your organic status as well. So can you separate the GM argument? Because your predicated argument is the whole picture of healthy living, healthy food, healthy production. Can we separate the GM from the chemical issue?
You'd probably have to ask somebody else that question. I'm really coming from this not as a farmer. I'm coming from this as a person who's running a business that is seeking to fulfil the demands of my customers. And clearly I'm in a subset of people that care about their food when they're already talking about sourdough. I get that. But I think, 4 years ago, I wouldn't have considered starting this business because the increase in demand is there, and I don't think it's really fulfilled in our community. I think the demand is much greater. I can't keep up at the moment. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. No other further questions? Thank you. I think Carolyn Rose is going to talk now. Thank you. Same option against Carolyn. 5 minutes. I'll give you a 30-second warning.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Caroline Rhodes and I'm the Chief Executive of Grain Producers SA. On behalf of our members, we thank the Council for this opportunity to address you. I understand that you've since received our submission from the 15th of July, and if you'd like a full copy of the Mercado economic report that you have referred to and is cited in our submission, I'm happy to provide that out of session. So GPSA represents South Australian grain producers to government, the community and to industry. We develop and implement policies and projects that promote the economic and environmental sustainability of South Australian grain growing businesses. We support the lifting of the moratorium. Our position is not about picking winning production systems, but rather enabling all producers to have the freedom to grow the crops that best suit their business. We believe that growers should have the freedom of choice to grow the cereal, legume and oilseed varieties that best fit their farming system, including genetically modified varieties. Removing the GM food crop moratorium from mainland SA will enable producers to have the same freedom of choice as growers from all other mainland states. The current moratorium on GM crops is constraining business and industry growth. It has ramifications for the South Australian economy, more broadly including the loss of reputation, loss of competitiveness, increased cost of business, industry stigma and loss of research investment. And these ramifications are covered in substantial detail as part of our submission. As I said, we're the only last mainland state to have a ban on the commercial cultivation of GM crops. And earlier this year, Parliament provided councils with a time-limited ability to retain the moratorium on that commercial cultivation for all other areas except for Kangaroo Island. So if an application by a council is ultimately successful, it will only prohibit the cultivation of GM varieties. It will have no application, for example, on the commercial sale of GM products in supermarkets or the transport of GM crops or products through this area. GM research may also be carried out in an area designated as GM cultivation free, subject to the approval of the Minister for Primary Industries. Any concerns relating to health or environmental impacts of GM crops cannot be considered by either state governments or councils. Those aspects are considered and are regulated by our science-based Commonwealth Gene Technology Regulator and Food Standards Australia, New Zealand. South Australian grain producers are becoming increasingly frustrated with the consequences that this moratorium has had on our industry's competitiveness, viability and our reputation. Our submission to Council addressed these issues, as well as the now debunked price premium that forms the basis of the moratorium. South Australian farmers have a long history of innovating and adopting new technology to improve productivity, and indeed just down the road we have the Roseworthy campus and home of Australian Grain Technologies. We need to ensure that we continue to have that access to the best tools on offer for best practice crop production. I'll just briefly address another matter, and that relates to industry coexistence. I'll note that different types of wheat, barley and rice are grown in close proximity to and channelled to different users without adverse effects to those markets. In fact, GM varieties such as omega-3 enriched canola are expected to yield price premiums, meaning that in the future, GM producers will be wanting to separate their premium product from conventional varieties. And we also know that South Australia's predominant grain handler and marketer, Viterra, is able to handle both GM and non-GM varieties. And I'd also note that at present, Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria all have a higher number of organic certifications than South Australia, and all permit the commercial cultivation of GM crops. So we know from interstate experience that that coexistence of cultivation of GM crops would be able to work effectively alongside other organic food production industry, as is the case in every other mainland state. So in 2019, the SA Government commissioned the high-level independent review of South Australia's moratorium conducted by Professor Kim Anderson. This review found that the moratorium has cost the South Australian grain industry at least $33 million since 2004, and we would contend that a direct cumulative cost is far greater than that. So I would say that the available evidence clearly indicates that there are no trade or marketing benefits to the town of Gawler holding a GM cultivation-free status. There are significant costs imposed as a result of the GM-free status, and Australia's robust supply chain guarantees industry coexistence. In the absence of trade and marketing benefits, we urge the town of Gawler to decline to make an application to be designated as GM-free. And as far as we're concerned, there has been 16 years to get to this point, and we would welcome an opportunity now to answer any questions that you have. And once again, thank you for the opportunity.
Have any questions? Councillor Davies?
So, yeah, you were talking about freedom of choice earlier. We did hear earlier from Graham Brookman about the story of, for example, the Western Australian farmer who lost his status due to things coming over it. So is that, I'm just wondering about the extent to which, freedom of choice ends up being sort of like freedom to smoke inside a restaurant, or some of those other freedoms that we do regulate when it interferes with other people, and just your thoughts on that.
Sure, and this matter has been widely canvassed in Parliament, where these matters have been widely discussed. So there was a select committee in Western Australia that categorically rejected on the evidence and of the court findings, both in the court case and the appeal, that the current laws concerning any damages are adequate in dealing with this. To the point earlier about spray drift, this is an industry stewardship issue that the industry, we manage on an industry basis. We've got stewardship programs. We look at industry codes of conduct that are in place, for example, in terms of grain harvesting during fire danger season. The industry has a high premium on coexistence and the way in which we interact. There is no benefit whatsoever in having a system by which there is special compensation set aside for this. It is dealt with under existing common law, and that has been the finding and determination both in the West Australian Parliament and as debated in the floor of the South Australian Parliament. So we believe that where that jurisdiction is best dealt with has categorically ruled and has rejected any assertion that a compensation regime is required up and above that of existing common law provisions.
Councillor Ballonger.
As a council, very good speech.
Thanks.
As a council, have we the right to overrule the state government?
As a council, you have the right under this legislation until I believe the 30th of September. You'll need to get your application into the Primary Industries Department for consideration. You have the right to put an application in to consult. There are certain requirements that you must meet in order to meet that threshold. Ultimately, that information is then considered by the GM Advisory Committee established under the Act, and it will be a ministerial determination. So it is absolutely within your jurisdiction tonight to consider whether or not to proceed with this. In the event that you do not wish to proceed, simply the moratorium is lifted. No action is required on your behalf.
Any other questions? Councillor Tooley.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions. Firstly, I presume you've heard tonight some statements made by some speakers and even some members that there is an economic advantage in being GM free. That's been a very strong point that's made.
Yes.
How do you respond to that? Because I think I'm
Sure.
hearing you giving us some other information.
In terms of the economic analysis, both the Mercado report, which is in fact a credible economic analysis, which, as I said, we based our policy on before proceeding, as well as the Anderson review, has found that there is no trade and marketing benefit assigned to the state-based moratorium. That's not to say that GM-free products are either favoured or not favoured by consumers. The point is that it is a market-based mechanism. No state-based legislation is reflected on a food label, for example. It would be the inherent quality or the market claim made by that manufacturer or product based on their own quality assurance systems. So that is why the organic industry can survive and has been thriving interstate, because they have the certification requirements, they do coexist, and their producers have gone down that path willingly, have had the freedom of choice of adopting their production system in order to take advantage of that market opportunity. Much has been made, and I've heard several references tonight, and certainly it was canvassed in a great deal by the Greens MLC Mark Parnell during the Select Committee in relation to a moment in time, comparing one port location to another. I'd say that there are two major flaws with that economic, if you could call it that, methodology, and that's comparing the discount between non-GM and GM in another state is not an analogous, it's not a comparison to South Australian canola pricing, because the most logical pricing point to analyse is a comparison between the price of non-GM in Adelaide and non-GM in other states growing GM crops. So it's important to choose, obviously, an important time period, but the market is driven by both global and domestic factors, with prices rising and falling. So a spot price at a moment in time is just one indicator. Now, producers every day of the week are making decisions: what crops to grow, which varieties to access, which grades to pursue, which delivery sites in terms of segregation do they want to access, and ultimately which grain marketer they wish to buy. So this is no different. It is simply a pricing reference that is published and is freely available, and producers with their agronomists will make that decision based on their own economic and agronomic factors.
Councillor Koch.
Yeah, thank you. Caroline, could you just explain the role of Monsanto and Bayer in this process, and are growers locked into a certain growing practice?
Sure, and certainly that is that's often cited as a reason to protect farmers from accessing GM canola because of the perceived threat or otherwise in relation to the multinational companies that you referred to. Let's be clear, no one is compelling any grower to grow GM canola or to choose a particular variety that is currently on offer. Our plant breeding system has moved a long way from the 1950s in terms of publicly bred varieties, and Bayer, as the owner of that particular gene that has been used in canola varieties and adapted obviously for Australian conditions is the owner of that intellectual property, and you have seed companies that then incorporate that into their particular varieties, and obviously they're available commercially everywhere except for South Australia. Now, in relation to Bayer and Monsanto, they have established licence requirements by which stewardship agreements are placed. Bayer and Monsanto, as you'd be aware, are large agrochemical companies, so growers, if you go into any commercial farm, you'll see their products on the shelf. I don't believe that the fear exists in relation to farmers, and I don't believe that it's giving farmers and their professional advisors, their agronomists, enough credit that decisions will be made in the interest of that farm. So all we can do is look to interstate and the way in which farmers have willingly chosen to adopt canola varieties. And if you look at Western Australia as the example, where that's been probably the strongest growth recorded, and that's been off the back of adaptation of varieties suitable for those production systems. Now, those varieties, some of those are traced back to Bayer. It's not, growers are constantly dealing with endpoint royalties and commercial seed producers, etc. This is no different. In terms of the ownership of that, the most exciting thing, much is made about canola, but there's also an exciting product that's being developed by an Australian-owned company for a GM safflower. So many of you might have seen that on Landline a few weeks ago. So there is an opportunity of new varieties coming on board. The way in which GM canola may perform in South Australia is largely untested. Because the moratorium has been in place, there is a large deterrent for any commercial seed company from trialling their GM canola varieties without a path to market here in South Australia. And to my earlier point about some of the unintended consequence, if you like, about having a state-based ban or moratorium in place is not only to deny growers access to commercial GM canola varieties that have been proven safe by the Office of Gene Technology Regulator, but it's also provided a direct disincentive for our plant breeding enterprises here in South Australia. We have the Australian Centre for Plant Functional Genomics based at the Wake campus. It's been that deterrent and that reputation risk that really it goes in no bearing to the economic analysis that's demonstrated there is no marketing benefit, but it is a direct cost. And I think as an industry, we're looking at embracing technology and empowering our producers to make their choices with the best interests of their commercial enterprise at heart. And this is no different.
Councillor Tooley, and a question?
Yep, two. Is there any data on which crops require less chemical maintenance, i.e. GM versus non-GM?
That's a really good question. Now, chemicals are used to adapt, obviously, different agronomic constraints in the field. So there are, obviously in Australia, we've got a very robust chemical registration program where certain chemicals for human health and environmental factors are limited in terms of application rates and timings, withholding periods, etc. This is no different. In terms of your specific question about, the level of chemical use in Australia, obviously, the access to chemistry registered by the APVMA, the chemical regulator in Australia, is critical to our production systems. It's been critical to the adoption of conservation farming here in South Australia. We have 80% adoption of no-till farming, and that has been through access to chemistry as well as the engineering. So in terms of your specific question, it depends on how that performs in that environment within that paddock according to the rainfall zone. But clearly chemical stewardship is something as an industry we're very focused on, and making sure that chemical application is done in accordance with the Australian Science Regulator in relation to chemical use and food safety.
Farm A, growing canola, GM versus non-GM, all environmental conditions are the same. Would I expect to use more or less chemicals with a GM product or a non-GM product?
I would suggest that you would need to look at the exact variety, but we know from cotton, for example, that less pesticide is used in their adoption of their GM cotton varieties. So what that also means as well is less diesel consumption because there's less spray application, for example. So it's hard for me to stand and give you those exact figures because what we're talking about is a system. It's an agronomic system depending on various variables, but the way in which that chemical application and indeed the cost of seed and then potentially segregation down the track, that is what goes into farmers making those decisions whether or not to adopt that variety. So you would have to look at the experience elsewhere. The other benefit for GM canola varieties is also the economic decision, not just based solely on that year's performance, but also the residual benefits which flow into the subsequent years. So I think even tonight we've heard some speakers talk about that, where clearly we're not going to see wall-to-wall GM canola grown. And in fact, if you look at in Australia at the moment, the percentage of GM canola varieties grown, canola crop comprises about 19% of area, but when South Australia is excluded due to the lack of access to GM canola, that increases to 21% of eligible canola cultivation. So we know that there will, it will form part of a rotation of an agronomic mix of a farming system. So it's not a monoculture in that sense, it is part of a farming system. And depending on that environmental profile, whether it's, dealing with a wet part of the year that is ensured that, the agronomic challenges relate to a particular weed profile, that's a dynamic system and farmers are making those decisions every day in their paddock right now with their agronomists, and this is no different.
Councillor Bellalogo.
Would it be right if we do ban GM products that the products that we produce will be far dearer and we couldn't grow as much?
I think in terms of South Australia's experience, obviously we haven't had GM cultivation of commercial varieties, but certainly globally the data would suggest, and there are a number of different case studies looking at products such as soybeans and corn and other crops that are grown in the Northern Hemisphere that have readily adopted gene technology as part of their breeding system. That has led to an increase in production. So by that, to extend that argument, I think it's fair to say that GM is certainly part of the food security mix in terms of increasing plant-based protein at a time of rising global population.
Okay, I think that's enough questions. Yeah, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
We'll move on. Thank you. We'll move on to item 4, declaration of interest. There's none. Confirmation of the minutes on the 9th of June. Councillor Fraser, seconded the Mayor. Any discussion? All those in favour? Against? Carried. Any business arising from the minutes? Councillor Fraser.
On page 6, Little Corellas,
All right.
on page 7, on and off leash areas, you're supposed to come to the August meeting. When can we expect that?
He's not there.
No, Jack's gone.
He just was there a minute ago. He just strolled out. Well, I'll put that question aside. We'll ask him when he gets back. Any other business arising? We'll move on to, where is it? Officers' reports, item 7.1. I'll get Mr. Delina to talk about to that at the moment to say what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
7.1. You found it, Councillor Bellalogo?
Through Councillor Little. The Listen, I apologise to members tonight on behalf of DIPTI. They've had to withdraw from the presentation. I suppose the short answer is that they're not ready to present to members, which is unfortunate. It was only a very, very late withdrawal this afternoon. So really the recommendation the recommendation doesn't align with the proceedings. So you can certainly note the report and that requests that DIPTI attend to present on this matter at a subsequent meeting or council workshop. And effectively that's where we're at. It's they're hoping they can attend within the next couple of weeks.
Councillor Shanks.
Can I move that we defer this to the next IES and hopefully DIPTI will come and then we can provide feedback then?
I'll refer back to Mr. Delena for that answer for that.
Through you, Chair. I believe they'd want to meet sooner than that, just in regards to continued progression of the Gawler Rail Electrification project and their timelines.
It's been suggested that we just note it and we move on to it in the next 2 weeks, if that is acceptable to the committee. Notes the Gawler, but doesn't say any time frame, but I think we discussed 2 weeks, didn't we?
Certainly the correspondence I've received this evening is that they'd like to meet with the council within the next 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, Councillor Shanks, you can move that motion.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, so we're noting this, but we are going to receive a presentation from DIPTI sort of in the next 2 weeks, or?
We don't know. If you wish, just a suggestion, make the motion that we
request.
We replace it and come back in 2 weeks' time for an answer. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, just I've got in my notes that I wanted to listen to the presentation to be able to advance. Without that presentation, I'm sort of at a dead end with it a little bit.
CEO? What's going on? Oh, that one, sorry.
Yeah, if I could, I think it'd be appropriate that my suggestion is that the matter be deferred.
Yep.
And that rather than the committee note the report, because that then implies that there might have been some information that and consideration that council, the committee hasn't really turned its mind to. So if we defer the matter and then we organise ourselves, whether it's in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but as soon as the DIPTI representatives are ready, then we present that back to either a council meeting or a workshop such that the members are fully briefed as soon as possible.
The Mayor?
So if we defer, we won't miss an opportunity to be briefed about our bridge. Because I'm a bit concerned if we defer, DIPTI will continue and we won't
I
get
think
briefed.
the move was to note it, not to defer it.
Well, no, the motion is to
Oh, to defer it, sorry, was to.
I just want to know how we, because it should come back through this committee.
Yes. I'll defer back to Mr. Delena for another answer.
Just a question on what that looks like.
Yeah.
Through you, Chair. DIPTI and through the process that we've been advocating for and that they've accepted is that there will be further engagement with the council with respect to the design and look and feel of the bridge before there's any further consultation with the community. So they will be coming back to the council in that respect, whether it's a special IES meeting that we have to call within 2 to 3 weeks. My sense that, and one of the intentions of tonight was to be able to collate the feedback in a motion to help direct staff with respect to their interactions with DIPTI.
But they withdrew about 4:30, didn't they?
Yeah.
Okay. Is the mover happy that we defer to a future IES meeting? We have a second for that. Councillor Tully, you happy for that? Wish to speak?
Yes, I think that's eminently logical. I agree with what the CEO said as well, because if we just say we noted the report, unlike everybody else, when I went to actually prepare for this several days ago, I thought there was an attachment in here and there wasn't. And it said, essentially, don't worry, you're going to get a presentation. So I thought, oh, great, tonight we'll get the presentation. If we say we've noted the report, this is not a report. What this is a regurgitation of past motions. It's not a report. So I think it would be misleading if we said, you know, we note. I think this is the eminently better way to do it. And we can call an emergency IES if and when it's needed.
Okay, any other discussion? Mayor, did you want to say something? No. You wish to close the debate?
I think this is probably the best way to go. We do need to listen to the DIP type project managers on this, and we do need to quiz them because in the end it is our bridge. So regardless if it's their infrastructure, we are going to take the brunt of what we want here in the town. So I do have a few questions I wouldn't mind asking given the presentation, and I'd like to sort of really make it known to those managers that you know, you've left us in the lurch a little bit, so it's not a good look. But I think this is the correct way forward.
Thank you. No further discussion. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. I'm going to change the procedure here a bit, move 7.3 up because we have interested parties in the gallery. So I thought we'd bring 7.3 forward. Somebody vote that way. Councillor Hughes, second, Councillor Ballawonga. All those in favour? Thank you. All right. There's a, yes, Mayor.
I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation, which is part the first officer's recommendation.
You happy to move the recommendation?
The first recommendation.
Seconded, Councillor Fraser. You wish to speak?
Yes, thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank all the speakers that have come tonight. I think that it's an interesting process having local government deal with an issue that sits, in my view, with state government. However, it is what it is, and what this motion does is it seeks further information. Around trade and marketing implications of the town of Gawler if we were to become GM free. We have a farmer, an organic farmer in our community now who says quite categorically that they will be affected. I think we need to listen to that. However, we need more information, and this is the way to do it. We know some of our surrounding councils are looking into this space. They're also going out to public consultation. It's up to them which way they go. However, I think they may be interested in participating in this study. So I leave it at that. I look forward to the debate, but it's an opportunity to debate and look and have a direction going forward, hopefully. Thank you.
The seconder wish to speak?
Yes, I feel very strongly about this point. We are responsible for the future generations, and this is really important. Back in World War I and World War II, the government actually gave the soldiers cigarettes to smoke to calm their nerves. Later on, we find out not only is it dangerous to the soldiers, but also the people around them, so the passive smoking as well. So we create all these problems, and then later down the track, we have to deal with it. We did the same thing with asbestos. Asbestos was told that it was all right, and then later down the track, we're told that it's cancerous. Roundup, same thing. Roundup, we were told it was quite safe to use in your home garden. Now it's not anymore. And, you know, a freedom of choice. If you're next door, if you don't want to be GM and the next door neighbour does, you don't have a freedom of choice, because before you know it, you have GM crops. So, you know, and also gut intolerance is another thing, which is many years ago, we used to have spelt flour. These days, everything's so over-processed that we have all these medical problems. So it's really, we really need to think about this very seriously. And Councillor Vallelonga said Gawler doesn't need to worry about it. Why do we need to worry about this? But we do need to worry about it. We have one of our ratepayers who's got a very, very good business on organic farming. So we need to be concerned for his future. It is really important. So yes, I want to vote for this because, as I said before, I feel very, very strongly about it.
Any other conversation for any member? Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, look, the way that this sits, for some reason it just doesn't quite sit right with me. We've got 11,500 ratepayers in the town of Gawler, and I do see this being a big thing for our state. There is no argument there. The way it sits, looks like we're leading the charge, but we are nothing in comparison to Light Council, Playford Council, the Barossa. What we're talking about doing is we want to engage a qualified consultant, I'm seeing dollars, to be engaged to prepare a report on the trade and marketing implications of the town of Gawler becoming an area in which no genetically modified food crops may be cultivated. I mean, that to me seems like we're hitting this a little bit heavy. I like point 2, council invites adjoining councils to participate. I definitely think the conversation should be opened up with our neighbours. I definitely think that we should be assisting in providing the information as it sits right now. And I do note that we have a very passionate ratepayer that bases his business around it, which I would definitely love to protect. But the weight that we are able to give as partnering with our neighbouring councils, I think is there, but I just don't really feel like we're the ones to be leading the charge on it, in my opinion. I just don't feel like our council is the right definition to be engaging to this level. So I would much rather see point 1 dropped off and point 2 be altered to council initiates conversation with adjoining councils to pretty much feel out how they're going to tackle this and assist where possible. But I don't think it really applies to the town of Gawler. And I do understand what Councillor Fraser is saying. I even understand what Catherine Warhurst is saying, and I completely support the local business and what she's trying to achieve. That's why in the bigger picture, I just don't want to be in the Gawler bubble on this. So that's my 2 cents on that one.
Councillor Tooley.
Two questions through you, Chair. The first one is, and I've only heard this anecdotally, but I'm hoping someone can confirm it, and that is that some of our neighbouring councils are in favour of the GM. I've heard that that's the case with Adelaide Plains, and with Light. I don't know about Barossa. Can anyone answer that question? Do we have anything clear about our neighbouring council status? That's my first question.
I don't know. I haven't heard him. The CEO. Have you heard anything, Joe?
Yes, Adelaide Plains are actually not proceeding. Light did pass a motion not to proceed, but have now done an about face, and they are going out to public consultation. Barossa, Adelaide Hills are going to consultation or are currently proceeding with consultation, and Playford Council have just finished the same day we did.
Right, thank you. And Councillor Tully?
And my second question, we know when a farm is organic, they're concerned about what drifts. And we've heard today, Mr. Brookman talked about drift coming across. This is my question. If we were to achieve GM-free status, but our neighbouring councils didn't, Adelaide Hills or like they're right on our boundary, would that essentially negate our effect? Because wind, things, bees, there's a hard boundary. They crop just there, right on our boundary as we move towards Roseworthy. So would that jeopardise our status if our neighbours were not also GM-free?
Well, the information I listened to tonight, the same as you, I would say that would be true. But Councillor Vallelonga?
Yeah, I just echo what Councillor Shanks said. I totally agree with Ian Tooley, and I also believe in the freedom of it. And I don't have a problem with organic farms. I reckon they're marvellous. But if we've got a freedom of choice in this country, and I believe that we should have that freedom here too.
Thank you. Councillor Sample?
Yeah, I'll certainly be speaking against this motion. I would certainly vote for the or that we have there. I've got 6 family members that are in the Adelaide Plains, and they have no problems with this sort of farming, and it goes all up around Hamley Bridge, Rosewood, just on the edge of Gawler and all that. And we heard tonight from CEO Caroline about the positiveness that's coming out of all of this. And, you know, I'm just not sure when Councillor Tooley asked the question, how many crops are grown in Gawler? You know what the question is? None. None. But the passionate man that we heard tonight talk about his organic farm, I don't disagree, but I don't believe in any way it's going to interfere with him, because he is a very successful businessman and he's moving forward. Does anybody in this room know how long it takes from the time a little chicken is born to the time you buy it from Coles and eat it? Well, that's more organic than anything you could possibly believe. And talk to a couple of farmers and find out. There's over 50,000 chickens in Gawler at the bottom of Paxton Street. Go down any time you want to see 50,000 chickens and just see what they're fed on. And we heard before about the point that it was not possible to get the right grain for bread. Well, Sunrise Bakery, they have 7 bakeries, and also our famous Assender's Bakery over here, buy all their grain from out here at Sherrick Lock and at Tarlee. All this stuff is available, and this, by us supporting it, is not going to do anything at all about changing the habits of the way our farmers in the area. And let's face it, the farmers in this area, this is God's country. They're going to have one of the best crops they've had for many years. So we should not be interfering it when it's nothing to do with us. If we had a crop of barley or canola down the main street of Gawler and we're looking for a crop this year, that's a bit different. We ain't got any crops here.
Thank you. Councillor Tooley, you want a question?
Speak.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'm actually going to speak against the motion. Because of the waste and the flawed arguments, that's what really annoys me the most. I was very annoyed and disappointed at the previous report that we got when I pointed out that the claims in there that gave the impression that we had a number of organic growers. And when I asked the questions, it turned out that was not true. They gave the implication that Winterlicks was possibly an organic source, and it was not. And I've made this point before, that it's really important, and I sent this in a recent email called Worrying Trends, that's really important that our officers' reports are very, very accurate. So that put me off, that report last time. What puts me off this time, and I've read just briefly here about the hurdles that we have to jump through in order to achieve a genetically modified free zone. I don't think we have the basis for it. it seems that we have one organic grower who's not a cereal grower, I don't believe, in the main. Does grow cereal? Okay, some cereal. But we're not predominantly a grain growing council. We're quite a small council, defined area. And I think what will happen if we spend up to $20,000 on this report is that we'll get a consultant who will say, yep, I'll write that report for you. And my fear is it'll be full of motherhood statements that will say, if you produced organic jams, nuts, produce in Gawler, this would be your marketing advantage. But I've heard tonight claims about marketing advantages of GM, and then I've heard the opposite from other people to say that data isn't there. So I think what we'll end up doing is spending $20,000, and I think some of the strong arguments will be based on one ratepayer, $20,000 for a report that I think will be ineffective, that will not be based on any evidence that says we really have a chance of achieving a GM-free zone, because we are not a major food bowl. We're just not. I can understand Light Council, Adelaide Plains, major grain growers. And if those major grain growers had a strong argument and a strong evidence-based argument that GM will kill their economy, that GM is environmentally, God bless them, I would listen to that and go with that. But I think they're very weak, the parallels that say that we will be able to achieve a GM-free status and essentially be an organic zone. It's going to be money wasted. It'll make some people on this council feel good. It might make the odd ratepayer feel good, but it'll be just another pouring of $20,000 down the gurgler of ratepayers' money. If there was a really good chance that we could achieve this and it was a real benefit for a significant number of producers in our town, I would be far more inclined to listen to that. And that last point that I made really was the final thing. Even if we did it and Light and Adelaide Plains didn't, those crops are right on our boundary. The GM, the chemicals, they're all right there. It'll drift.
Any Councillor Koch.
Look, I'll be supporting this motion. I think it's a moral decision. It looks like to me that Light decided not to go down the track and they've changed their mind. So they've seen since, I suppose, the Barossa is looking down this way, Adelaide Hills, Playford. We can create a zone of genetically modified crops in this area. We could create, and that would create high value jobs. And I think that's important. We need to do that for our community. I look at the risk involved. We're told that 81% of the canola growers in Australia don't even use it because potentially it's too expensive or there's a risk. So we're actually opening up our state to a huge risk when very few growers are actually using it. I think that, so not only it's canola, but it's all the other crops. So I think there was a bit of self-interest there anyway. For me, it's to do with health as well. Health comes through biodiversity and that creates resilience within your community. This has nothing to do with biodiversity and diversity. It's to do with monocultures. And I think that's not the way to go. Yep, that's about it. So I'll be supporting this because I think it's important that we make a decision that is a long-term decision for our whole community and not for multinationals. Because once the genie's out of the bottle, you can never put it back in again, ever. So I ask other councillors to support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Goose.
Yeah, I actually agree with some of the points that Councillor Koch said about the niche of looking at Adelaide Hills Council, which has been a very strong GM-free council traditionally and is going through the process. I think Mount Barker is also in that situation, and just looking, if Gawler is successful it would sort of market a status for Gawler as well as a sort of a niche for these smaller properties that produce nuts or fruit and yet they do produce jams and things like that. They do value add and they do provide jobs, and they do employ a lot of young people in our area as well. I think that whole niche is why Kangaroo Island has got the status of GM free. That area is staying GM free, and I think it's all about marketing and getting value for money, and it's good for Kangaroo Island. But so I actually see it could work that way as an economic benefit for the smaller landowners, especially through the Adelaide Hills, and include Gawler in that sort of market. So it's that point of price difference and differential. So it could be a really good opportunity for local, and we could grow those local heritage grains or something like that on small scales and things like that, where you can value add in that area. So yeah, I think there is a case. So I'll be voting for the motion.
Any other discussion? Councillor Davies?
Yeah, look, I think just something to remember is what this motion suggests isn't that we go ahead, it's that we get a report and it gets brought back to council. And I don't consider myself enough of a personal expert on the trade and marketing implications of the town of Gawler becoming an area in which no genetically modified food crops may be cultivated, for me to sort of make a decision without seeing evidence, or just based on, someone said this, someone said this. So I'm happy to support that we get the information, that it comes back to council.
Thank you. Any other discussion? You've spoken. Pardon? You seek leave to speak again? Councillor Shanks wishes to speak again. All in favour? Yeah, you've got it.
Yeah, so the way that the motion sits, and I am worried about the or getting up, just because we won't pursue, and equally by not pursuing, we're not educating ourselves on the way forward. Again, I was wondering if I could ask the mover and the seconder to offer an amendment of dropping point 1 and using point 2 to council initiates conversations with adjoining councils to participate in the study, because a qualified consultant to be engaged to prepare a report on the implications of the town of Gawler, it doesn't seem big enough to be able to.
Yeah, I can tell you the answer's no already.
Thank you for listening.
Any other discussion? Do the mayor wish to close the debate?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for a considered debate. I've written down some notes. We've talked about, Carolyn Rhodes talked about loss of reputation, industry stigma, so reputational risk by not having GM crops. We talked about freedom of choice. However, we're not including the food forest in that freedom of choice, which I find very strange given that they're in our council areas. We talked about contamination and drift, but then I recall tonight Graham Brookman talked about buffers and the successful nature of buffers to protect that. We talked about the fact that the food forest has the largest pistachio crop in Australia, yet we were told that we don't have any crops growing in Gawler. Then there was talk about regional focus, joining with other councils to create a zone. Councillor Davies talked about getting further information so that we are in an informed position to make a decision, because we're in fact not making a decision tonight about whether we become or put in a petition to the minister to become GM free. We are talking about getting further information so we can make that informed decision. We talked about a moral decision that Councillor Koch talked about, a passionate debate from Councillor Fraser, thinking about the future of our community that would be GM free, the unknown nature of the evidence around or the impact of genetic modification. When you modify genes, that's a tricky situation, and I think long-term data is required, and it's not there just yet. We talked about heritage crops and the possibility of having them in our region. We are part of a region. So as I close the debate, I put this motion for people to support so that we can get further information. We can potentially share with our neighbouring councils who seem quite keen. But I think we need to have this back to our council sooner rather than later so that we can actually provide direction for businesses such as the Food Forest and such as the new business that Catherine Warhurst has started and will be extremely successful. Thank you.
Okay, put that motion. All those in favour? Against? Carry. On to 7.2. Still got somebody talking there. We got a presentation, I believe, for that. You've got I'll pass to Mr. Delina for that. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, before we start, could we have a motion from the floor to extend the meeting, please? Councillor Davies, seconder, Councillor Hughes. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Okay, thanks, Mr. Delina.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to welcome Alex and James from Landscape Urban Design to provide a presentation as part of tonight's consideration of this matter. Just really provide an overview of the summary of the feedback received to date, and really then it's back to the members in terms of how we look to proceed with this project. So probably about 10 or 15 minutes.
Welcome, Alex and James. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I think we've got a...
Can you come closer to the microphone, please, or you take it off if you wish, just hold it.
Do we have the presentation? Look, we'll be relatively quick tonight because I know it's been a long meeting, but you may recall we had a Zoom meeting a couple of months ago about the draft beautification plan, and I guess seeking feedback and direction from yourselves about where we're going to sort of proceed with it. If we flick through, oh, great. So I'll just run through very quickly what the original overview and the project purpose was. So it was really to undertake an assessment of the existing town entries and their current conditions. Then understanding and exploration of what beautification is in respect to Town of Gawler, the entries, and also broadly throughout the township. And then review relevant case studies and examples of beautified entries, and we looked at some last time, and then develop a beautification plan for the Town of Gawler. And this was about bringing it back to service standards as well, and what increased beautification meant for service standards, and then identifying any possible major capital upgrades. When we went out and did the case study, we looked at the major entries. So we looked at 7 of them, but we also looked more broadly at the township. The entries were, I guess, a good talking point and something that it was raised by people in the community about the entries and that sense of, I guess, beautification or lack of beautification as you came into the town. So very quickly, we've done the field survey. We've started to understand the service levels, and we're getting together some big matrices of, what line marking costs, what slashing costs, what tree pruning costs, and starting to understand what that means when you're starting to look at kilometres of road verges as well. Then we did the council member survey, which will go through the results. And then we've had, I guess, one Zoom workshop, and we're having another one today. And then what we really want is some direction on how we're to proceed with the final beautification plan. I'll let James very quickly go through the survey results.
Yeah, thank you. We have previously gone through the results at our last workshop, so I will be quite brief. As we noted previously, there were 4 responses received. So we'll note that obviously these responses aren't reflective of the whole council chamber or more broadly the community, and we'll get to that as well. So the first question was, what were the most and least attractive entries into the town? And Riggs Hill was generally considered the most attractive, Main North Road South through Cuddler, and then the least attractive were considered Main North Road South and Brossa Valley, Ryde and Red Banks. In terms of other examples, and we did discuss this in the workshop as well, in terms of what were considered attractive entrances to townships nearby, and Tanunda and Brossa towns were considered other attractive examples. We spoke about some other examples in Adelaide and South Australia as some other examples again that we can get to. Golden Grove, I think, was mentioned as part of that. What do you think detracts most from the visual amenity? And unkept verges, rubbish, visual clutter. So really the themes about maintenance were discussed and as being the key sort of detractors from the visual amenity. And that was reflected in, again, the next question in terms of what, in respect to beautification, how important are the following? And again, we see similar themes of general tidiness and cleanliness, maintenance, and then also some more capital works upgrades in terms of planting, tree management, etc. And then ranking the entrances in terms of priority, and this is reflective of probably the most commonly used entrances as well. Number 1 being Main North Road South and then Main North Road North as the key priorities. I won't go into the other comments received in too much detail, but again, very similar themes about a real importance of just general maintenance, upkeep in terms of removing litter, maintaining vegetation, tree pruning, and then also line marking, etc. Just really quickly from our discussions at the last workshop, what were the key themes and actions to come out of it? And we've broadly categorised those into one being about land management and maintenance standards, and then the other about the true intent of the project and where to go from here in terms of whether or not to open up this project to a community consultation process. The first, land management and maintenance, we discussed and had some diagrams around mainly the entrances are owned or are DIPTI assets. So maintenance is therefore carried out by DIPTI. And so council only has a limited capacity as it currently stands to maintain those areas. And there are obviously limitations around that. The next about an action being to review DIPTI's maintenance standards and making sure that there is a commitment to maintaining these entrances to that standard as well. And that another comment about making sure that council has a limited maintenance resource, and increased maintenance would therefore require additional resourcing as well. One of the other themes in terms of the project purpose and scope was around making sure that we're keeping on track in terms of the intent of the project, not necessarily being about capital works upgrades and major entry sort of focal points or projects, but really about making sure that maintenance is maintained to a standard that's acceptable. And the final comment, that the 4 responses to the survey are not reflective of the broader community necessarily, and that there was some discussion around whether or not the project should be opened up to the broader community.
Yeah, so I guess the 2 key actions that we were asked to look at was, should we take it out to the broader community, and should we be consulting the wider community about beautification of Gawler and what it means for them? And I guess we sort of discussed internally and with the staff, and and that's where we're seeking your direction. But some of the things to consider about going out to the broader community and asking about, do you want more green grass? Do you want more trees? Do you want it to be, more beautiful? It does become a little bit of a wish list. And certainly if I received a survey that said, do I want increased greening? Do I want my streets to look better? I will definitely say yes to all of these. And so when you go out to a survey like this, which is about improving the amenity and standards, I think we have to be really careful about the questions and how we ask them. And so we did a similar one with the City of Holdfast Bay, and that was about their open space, and it was about the quality of the open space that they were providing, and also if they had enough open space. So we actually had a question in the survey was, would you accept higher rates, or would you pay more council rates for improved public realm and open space? And the results were only about 30% of respondents said that they would pay more, and that they were actually satisfied with the level based on the current rates they were paying. So it tried to put things in perspective, because it's really hard for general community members to understand the DIPTI implications and also the costs of providing a beautiful Tanunda entrance at every entry that you have as well. So I think if we do want to go out to the community, if that's the direction that we want to take, we just need to be careful on the way we do that and actually work out what sort of responses do we want from the community, like what are we actually trying to achieve, and what sort of feedback do we want? So it has to be really targeted. Otherwise, you will just come back with a wish list, really, and then we're probably in the same spot that we were before. So that's sort of just making sure we're aware of, I think, going forward. And then the other one was the DIPTI maintenance. And I'm not sure if Paul or Sam want to expand on this, but council staff did have a really good meeting with DIPTI last week. Sam, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I suppose we referenced it in the council report. There was an opportunity that arose to meet with the persons in senior management responsible for maintenance, and we grabbed it with both hands. And myself and Paul Cleghorn and Ben Gilio attended Friday, and it was as it related to the new maintenance contracts that DIPTI have recently awarded, and they've awarded the 4 different zones across the state. And we put on the agenda a number of issues as it relates to town of Gawler. One of the, and they were primarily around the frustrations we have with the current arrangement, and that it's affected with the service levels that we're getting out of that. And it's really more about their management of the performance of their contractors more than the service levels they've actually specified, to be honest. So we were really pleased to hear what they had to say about the new contracts and how they're being set up and how they're being resourced with respect to monitoring and compliance, and how there is some penalties for non-compliance, financial penalties that are being put into the contract. But I am tempered by past performance. So it's something that we will continue to work with them. But the main thing is that we have a couple of different points of contact within DIPTI to be able to look to better integrate and coordinate both council works and what DIPTI are doing and those interfaces. So that was a positive out of that meeting.
Thanks, Sam. And I guess you'll see in the report, but to summarise the community consultation, we've put up what the opportunities are, and I think there's some real benefits, but there are also those considerations that I spoke about. So then next steps and moving forward, and what we want to discuss is, I guess, do we go out to the broader community? And then if we do, we will prepare some draft material and draft survey questions that obviously will come back and we'll get to review. And then also with the DIPTI, I think start to advocate to state government, because I think that's such a big part of your, beautification is that Dipti management. And I think that's going to be the tough one to explain to the community as well, that when they come and say, there's rubbish here, it's not being slashed, to just say it's Dipti, I don't think the layperson's really going to understand that. So I think we have to come at it from both sides and think, holistically about how we can actually improve the standard of service levels, and then also target specific things that will help, beautify Gawler, and whether that be more tree planting, the native grasses that we're looking to do on some other streets, or, more wooded in areas, or, is it increased line marking, increased street sweeping? So what is it specifically that is going to, help to lift the standards of the town of Gawler? And I think that's the sort of direction that we want to know. And right now, I guess, just with only having 4 respondents to the survey, it's really hard for us to say, what's the priority and which direction should we be taking. So I think that really, I guess, hopefully brings us back up to speed where we sort of left off last time, and open the floor for discussion and questions.
Are there any questions of James and Alex? There's none. Okay, thanks, gentlemen. Oh, sorry, you've got one, Mr. Brian, Councillor Sandberg.
I've been sort of listening for the roundabouts. Is there any reason what is different between Peachy Road at Playford and Gawler? Because if anybody wants to drive down Peachy Road, see the roundabouts with the low foliage, and I was up at the Riverland over the last weekend, every roundabout up there's got foliage in the middle, but we constantly are getting told that there cannot be foliage on a roundabout. So, I'm a bit mixed up whether I've got to go to Livenberry or Playford to get a roundabout with foliage in it. So can you tell us something, why nothing's really been mentioned about foliage inside, especially the Ride Street one down by the RSL Hall, and so forth? It's so easy to put, pig face or something in there, at least to cover the ground with no maintenance.
Yeah, so my understanding is that if you decide to plant a roundabout, which is Dipti, then you would have to take over care and control of the maintenance of the roundabout. So it's really a decision for council to decide, if you do want to beautify some of these areas, then you would have to accept ownership and maintenance. And that has happened on some roundabouts as well, as you mentioned, where councils do make that call and they say this is of high importance to us. But I guess it's how long's a piece of string as well, and that's what you'll have to determine where you want to maintain up to and take care and control of.
Would it be the council that they start to drive to show the piece and what we want to do? What way do we move about to get it? It would have been asked for 5 or 6 years.
Well, that's what we're here tonight to understand. I mean, I think the first question that we really want to know is, do you want to go out to community consultation? Do you want to hear from the community about whether they think roundabouts are really important? And then 2, do you want to start maintaining or looking at areas that Dipti currently maintain?
The Mayor.
Thank you. Look, our job is to lead the community, and I think if we went out to community consultation and asked them, would you like this, this and this, they'd say, why aren't we doing our job? And Brian's right, this has come up over and over again over many years. And I think certainly if we were to get to a point of a beautification plan, which includes maintenance, which includes opportunities to advocate, what do we want to advocate to Dipti? Because I don't think we should be taking over complete ownership or maintenance of all these roads. However, I think there's an opportunity to target certain areas, and we might have to concede and say we will take over certain, like Brian says, certain roundabouts, for example, and create eye-catching entranceways, and it doesn't have to be expensive. There's ways of doing that that are not particularly expensive. So certainly community consultation, if we had a plan, but not before a plan, that's crazy. Because, you know, if I was a ratepayer, go, that's what you're there to do. You're there to come up with ideas, make decisions, certainly consult with us, but don't go and say, oh, what would you like? And we've got nothing to show them. So I think that there's certainly lots of opportunity for improvement around the town. And yes, it is most of these roads are DIPTI roads. So it is striking that balance. Yeah, and you might have only got 4 survey results, but we're also elected to these positions by, you know, a few hundred people each. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it is quite, you know, I think that's not to be underestimated either. We're not just individuals, we're elected representatives from our community. So I think that they can be taken into consideration, not the only thing. Yeah, that's my thoughts.
Councillor Fraser.
I understand DIPTI are responsible for the verge down on Main North Road, but my understanding is that the other DIPTI roads DIPTI are only responsible to the gutter, and then we're responsible for the footpath. Is that right or not?
I'll ask Mr. Delena.
Through you, Chair, there's a really good, one of the attachments to the council report provides a really good description of the extent of DIPTI roads. So I'd urge you to have a look at the attachment, but it depends on the nature of the road. If you're coming down Main North Road, coming from the southern entry, coming past the southern entry sculptures, and you know, obviously there's no gutter, so their responsibility is the whole road reserve corridor. But the thing is, they don't really touch trees. So if there's a dead tree, they won't remove it. They'll just leave it there. Unless it falls over, then they'll consider removing it. They have very limited budgets with respect to fencing renewals. So they'll let fences really get in a degraded manner. And that's just the challenges that they told us that they face. And that's the service levels.
Councillor Fraser.
I understand all that. I'm talking more about Adelaide Road, which is a DIPTI road as well, but are we responsible to the verge?
Yes, certainly. Effectively, the black component is DIPTI. The curb and behind is the council. Yeah.
Well, any more questions of Alex and James? Have you a question of Alex and James before I let them go? Councillor Tooley.
Yeah, you asked the question of us about community consultation. I'm surprised actually to hear a view expressed that we shouldn't go out. What are we going to ask? We're scared of what we get. I'd like to remind you guys, we're elected members, and a number of us, in fact, the gentleman who triggered this, who's not here tonight, Councillor Goldstone, this was initiated by him because he was lobbied by the community about the filthy state of the main street. That's where it mainly started. And then it morphed on to the entrance statements. I too have been lobbied. Our community speaks to us in the Bunyip regularly about the filthy state of toilets, the filthy state of the main street. And we are elected to represent the community. I disagree with the Mayor, and I disagree with this view that we should work in a detached state. I think the word was used, leadership, so we make decisions on behalf of the people. I flip that around. I'm elected to represent...
Point of order from the Mayor. Hold on, Councillor Tooley, point of order from the Mayor. He's got his on, hold on. There you go.
I'm being misrepresented. I actually said we go out to the community with a plan. That's what I said. So please don't misrepresent. You're misrepresenting me. That is a breach. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll hold that point of order because that's exactly what the Mayor did say. Councillor Tooley, I'll uphold her point of order on that aspect. Could you have another question of Alex and James?
So to me, it's an absolute no-brainer that we are elected, we represent the people. They put us here, and they tell us what they want. And a number of us, when we go out and we campaign on those very issues. And we have an obligation. If we don't get the community input and we go off on a tangent and produce something and say, well, we've shown great leadership and this is what we think you want, and we don't ask them, then that's an oxymoron. That is dumb. So for me, and I'll speak to this when we come to the motion, it's an absolute no-brainer. And a question to finish with, do you know John Rice Avenue and Phillip Highway, the big roundabout near Holden's?
Mm-hmm.
It's the only roundabout I know that's got massive gum trees on it, massive gum trees. Doesn't seem to present a problem for anybody. Is that owned and maintained by Dip Tie or by Playford?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have
Sam,
that.
do you know?
We can't add. Yeah, I don't think that's in the realm of the answer, Councillor. So might ask.
We can certainly take it on notice. I'm 99% sure it'd be the council because DIPTI don't do landscape treatments in roundabouts for councils.
No, they don't. Yeah, I can speak from authority there that they don't. In my past life, they actually don't like them. So yeah, Councillor Hughes, question. You move the motion? You wish to speak to it?
Yes, please. It's sort of, I think the motion sort of covers it well, and I really thank Alex and James for the work. And I did actually get some feedback from Councillor Goldstone with this motion. He was actually happy, and he sort of agreed at this stage about not having consultation as well. And I actually spoke to some people about whether we do put this out for consultation, and one person said that the community at the moment would absolutely lose it if we put this out for consultation. She actually said some swear words as well because of COVID and other priorities that are in the town. She said, Joe, there's a lot more important things that we should be doing. But so I agree with the Mayor about getting the plan up, and that's chance then to get further comment. But I think we do have to be careful when we do consult with our community as well. It's a bit of an art and a science as well. And I think we really need to have that liaison squared away with the contractors from Dip Tie. So sort of support the last point 3 that really needs to be really nailed strongly, because the contractors, in a lot of the cases, the contracts are written, they get paid whether they do the work or not. It's a set fee and they just bill it every quarter or whatever. So if they don't have to do the work, they don't do it. It's been my experience, which is pretty disappointing, but you're constantly chasing contractors. And it is a lot of work that in my line of work, we constantly are doing that, unfortunately. I like the idea of cooling our streets in the areas, like maybe some major roundabouts or something like that, and the native grasses. And I think the idea of pig face is just a fantastic. It's a native that survives in Gawler fairly well with minimal care and maintenance from Councillor Samble. But yeah, I think it's a great job. It's certainly a lot more than I thought we'd get to with just picking up some sticks and just doing some rubbish pickup for our statement. So it's been a real thorough study of the whole area. So it's pretty impressive that we've got going to end up with a draft plan. So we're very happy to move.
Have a second for that motion? Councillor Samble, you wish to speak?
Yes, I'll certainly second the motion because I, like Councillor Goldstone, I'm so glad that he's pursued this and brought it to attention to everybody. But I suppose there's one question I did notice on page 8 of 122. I noticed that the amount of vehicles that use the cars each day it must have been done about 30 years ago, I think, because those figures certainly are nowhere near what is happening now. And there was a comment just made a minute ago that if the contractors don't do the job, they still get paid for it. Well, I don't really think that's good enough for us as elected members representing our people. How can we go back to them when they complain about that the side of the road between here and Tiver Road is looking like a jungle, you know, and so somebody's been paid for it, but they haven't cut the grass. And the way they cut the grass the other day, I'm not kidding you, is pathetic to every sense of the word. So I think we've got to start to get a little bit tougher in what we say. We heard Mr. Lalina say about point of who owns roads and everything. I mean, it was always my argument. We, the town of Gawler, own Murray Street. You know, I'd like to know, and I'd like every elected member to know what streets we own as the representative councils of it. Councillor Fraser said, well, who owns what, and so forth there. We're not talking about big high trees. I mean, the amount of people that say to me, you know, when we come from the Barossa Valley and see all the beautiful entries into the town like Lindock and all those areas, and we come into Gawler and we start to come down Lindock Road and see the trees hacked to pieces. Who are the people that allow them to hack the trees like that away from the power lines? Nothing even, and they're the worst trees and the worst entry into this town. So if we can get something rolling, and I'm very disappointed that only 4 participated in all of this, and the report that we've got we can work with and so forth, but you know, go down Peachy Road, go up the Riverland and just see where that's there. We can have it here. It could be a project for service clubs. At Lions Club at Loxton have done the roundabout there. Wow, you should see it. It would just be beautiful to stand back and look at it. So I ask you to support this motion and to support future beautifying of this beautiful town that we've got, so that we can hang our head high and say, well, look, you know, we've got our staff, we've got community groups to be involved and to beautify that. And I'm sure when you walk out of the RSL hall, if you saw that whole dusty dirt area covered with something, you'd say, that's great. Thank you.
Councillor Shanks.
I'm just wondering if the mover and seconder would be up for an amendment to point 2. So supports the methodology detailed in this report to finalise the preparation of a draft beautification plan and a draft community consultation be presented at a future meeting. I'm happy to be assisted with wording, and I'm keen to tell you why.
The mover.
Can I speak to it or not yet?
I was going to say, as the mover, I don't think we need to consult at this stage. So I'm sort of happy to leave the consult out. So I think we're going to have a plan that comes back to council. So.
Okay, all right. No, are you speaking all for or against the motion? Because you already asked for it and they've refused, councillor, so you either speak or against the motion.
I'll speak to the motion. The reason I wanted to adjust that point 2 is this right now is the infancy that will result in projects like the Walker Place. Now, the Walker Place project is a beautiful outcome. There is no argument there. Bringing people along for the ride, and which I know that there was public consultation after the direction was set. I don't see any harm in bringing people along for the ride. I have my own opinions on entrance statements, but a lot like Kelvin, I know that his main thing was around town beautification as a whole, not just the entrance statements. The way that this draft sits at the moment, it is very entrance statement driven. and we do get a lot of feedback around them. So I do understand why we want to ask the question, but I don't see the harm in asking it now. I don't see the harm in bringing people along for the ride. And if, as Councillor Hughes says, that we'll get torn to shreds, well, then so be it. Then we turn around and go, well, you know what? We need to put this on ice, because obviously what we think as people, independent people, isn't actually paralleling with the town's thoughts and wants and needs right now. So asking the question, bringing them along for the ride, I think is the smart play. And although it might be argued, well, we don't have a plan at the moment, that's why we need to be very appropriate with the community consultation and the way that we put it out there. We have nothing to lose other than more fact coming back to us. So the way it sits right now, look, if I'm for or against, I'm going to have to be for it. But look, I've got to warn you, I'm going to have another crack when it comes up to the regular council meeting, because I do believe there is really, really nothing to lose. And for a community that thinks that we advance with things and waste a whole bunch of money because they don't understand why we're doing it from the very get-go, whether you believe that or not, it's a moot point. It's so easy to trump that argument by just communicating, by just bringing these people along. And who knows, they might even bring something to the table that the 10 of us wise people do not actually bring. So, like I said, I'll be supporting it as it sits, but yeah, be pre-warned, I will be going for this amendment again.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Councillor Tooley. Oh, sorry. It's all your...
Question first,
yes.
if I might. Councillor Samble's most favourite iconic sculpture, does that sit on Dipti land or council land at the southern entrance?
Mr. Delina.
It's a bit complicated. The eastern side is within the road reserve corridor, so it's in land that's normally under the care and control of Dipti, but we have authority to place that there, so we maintain that to a higher standard. And on the western side, I believe it's actually located on Renewal SA land, and we've got a licence agreement with them to place that item there.
Yep. You wish to speak to the motion or against the motion?
Yeah, yeah. When people contact me, and they do quite often, cleanliness comes up an awful lot. Those rusty fingernails of Councillor Samble's favourite comes up a lot. But that's a good example, actually, of how it seems we didn't let the issues of Renewal SA or Dipti get in the way, and we've got on and spent initially 260,000, of which 25 was on landscaping, and that died, and so we've now put another 35,000 or 32 in. And we haven't had a problem doing that, and that's an entry statement. And what a lot of people say to me is, Ian, I don't give a flying F about whether that filthy mess, an overgrown grass, is Dipti or council, just get it cleaned up. And you know what? We could do that. It's not a big cost. It's not a big cost. But we often stand back and say, no, because it's Dipti's, we're going to blame Dipti, which is what point 3 is on here. So that's my first point. We should just get on and get it done and stop the frigging around between us and Dipti. Get some of that stuff cleaned up. It's basic cleaning up stuff. Secondly, because I've just worked out that point 2 does not include community consultation, there is no way, I don't care if I'm the only one, can I support, and I hope people are listening to the recording, I totally believe I'm elected to represent, not just think for the community. And therefore, to me, I'm always for community consultation. And for the second bit, which is listening to the community consultation. And the majority of people, if any of you guys read the Bunyip and the letters to the editor, a recurring theme is, why is the main street so filthy? I think Brian Tom wanted to put in a budget bit that we spend some money to get the whole thing steam cleaned and sealed. The problem with point 3 is there's no point 4. We are happy to deflect attention and blame and have a go at Dipti. Why is there not a point 4 in there that says, Gawler Council, what can you do? Because that's the one thing that hasn't been discussed. We right now could deploy our staff in a way to improve the cleanliness of the main street. We'd get a huge tick. We control that, but there's nothing in here that acknowledges that we've let the game down. The majority of people who have a go at us about what they call a filthy main street, the filthy toilets, etc. That's stuff that we control. And we've just beautifully just glazed over it. We could score a lot of points with our community if we put a point 4 in there and said, and we are going to review and implement better standards of cleanliness in our main street and get it looking a lot better, which is essentially where Kevin Goldstone started. That's where this started. He got lobbied by his community. That was one of the things he was elected on, and he wanted to honour that. And it's morphed into a bigger project, but we've lost sight of the basics. The community have told us they're the basic things they want done. But what we're doing now is we're saying, you know what? It seems to me there's a strong voice here that says it's too complicated. We might not get answers we like. We won't go into community consultation. Well, I'm exactly the opposite. We should be going into strong community consultation. And there should be a point 4 on there that says we can lift our game as a council. We can direct our depot staff. We can do a better job. We already have those people employed. We have the resources. We have the machinery. We could be lifting our game on that. But it's missing. So they're my reasons why I can't support this.
Councillor Koch.
Chair, I'll be supporting this motion. I'll just go through a couple of things. It's been raised a few times about filthy toilets. I think from my point of view, they are very clean, and particularly in this COVID era. I do know that council staff have spent a lot of time cleaning those toilets, and I applaud them what they do. So they're not filthy. So somebody's very interesting comments. I think the issue around us just getting on and doing all Dipti's work, well, that's a great idea if you want to get contractors get paid for extra nothing. So we're then taking on the responsibility. Dipti would love that. So where do we find the budget for that? You know, we haven't, you know, we're told that we've got to cut our rates down, everything else. Where are we going to find the budget for that? My observation is that a lot of our staff have been directed to work in the new development areas because I think some of the landscaping has been overdone, and a lot of our staff are down there maintaining very intricate landscapes. So that's a lot of where our staff are actually going at the moment. So that's a knock-on effect when we agree to these intricate landscapes, which are more like botanic gardens than community gardens. I've done a bit of landscape design over my time. That's a bit of my background. And I know that when you design something, you have to design it to within your financial and human capacities. So when I design a landscape, I always look at the resources I've got to maintain that landscape. Now, if you just decide to say, well, we're just going to go out to community consultation and you tell us exactly what you want and, you know, we'll do it, you're going to get a wish list this long. And there's no way, potentially, there's no way that you actually satisfy that. So you increase the expectations within the community and then you've basically let people down. So you're actually better off, and I found this from my work, it's better off to actually do a proper design and work with that design. And that does revolve around financial sustainability and the resources you've got. So I like this. I think that's a very good it's a very, very good motion. It'll move our community forward. And I think we will get some outcomes within our community and the way we manage our community. But I do think if you're actually going to take on Dipti's role, I think that's an absolute mistake. Thank you.
I moved it. He moved it. Okay. the mayor's moved that we put the motion. That we put the motion. All those in favour? Okay, it's carried. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. I'll now adjourn the meeting as we've run it. Yes, the mayor, a formal motion, we adjourn the meeting. Seconder, Councillor Fraser. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Bloody hell, that was a grueling.